911 responders. What is a call that you will never forget? My first cardiac arrest call. An old lady had woken up to her husband not breathing. He'd passed at some point during the night it seems, but all I was given at the start of the call was that he wasn't breathing, so I launched into CPR instructions. They lived out of town, so it took the ambulance crew about 25 minutes to get out to them. There was nothing crazy about the call and I've dealt with way more traumatic calls in the 2 years since, but at some point during the call, she realized he was gone, and you could hear it in her voice. That shift in tone is what sticks with me. 911 dispatcher here. There's many that stick with me, but the absolute hardest one was a mother finding her child after the child had committed suicide by hanging. She was absolutely destroyed, but I could clearly hear her fighting to keep control as I walked her through getting the child down and attempting CPR. I knew that child was gone, but the mother refused to give up. I stayed with her on the phone and counted compressions with her while we waited for PD and the ambo to arrive, listened to her alternate between counting and begging her child to come back. When the EMTs showed up and took over, she finally let it go. That scream broke me, and I can still hear it to this day. Man called to report a male was breaking into his neighbor's vehicle across the street. A few minutes into the call the man came and started to break into the caller's vehicle. A few minutes later the man spotted my caller and broke into his house from the window. Spent 10 minutes listening to physical fight when I finally heard the police enter the house and say there's blood everywhere. Both intruder and caller died. Oh, and another 911 dispatcher had my caller's wife and kids on another line who were hiding upstairs and heard everything. I talked a lot of people who were shot / stabbed / beaten in the final moments of their lives, but you usually get them after the situation occurred. This caller was just trying to look out for his neighbor, and I spent a good 15 to 20 minutes bantering while waiting for officers to arrive and get the auto thief. Getting to joke around and get to know someone's personality before they violently die hit a lot different than taking a call after violence had occurred. I'm not a first responder, but a dentistry student. Dentistry professionals can work in the hospital as trauma surgeons of the face. This facial surgeon showed us a case of a man that didn't pay his drug dealers. They took it to an empty field and blew his face off with a shotgun and left. Surprisingly the man survived and woke up half an hour later and called the police. They spent hours trying to pinpoint his exact locating because at this point he was somewhere in the middle of an open field and obviously he didn't have eyes anymore to help them. He was taken to the hospital and his surgery took 18 hours, but he did survive. Edit. Today he lives in a rest home with a tube helping him breathe and another helping him eat. A life that it won. My friend got a call from a very cross-sounding old lady that was absolutely furious because her neighbors had stolen her plants. When my friend asked her how she knew it was them, the woman said, "Because there's holes in my yard, and she planted them in her fucking garden. I'm going to go take them back. I have a shovel, and you probably won't get here in time to do anything about it." Thank goodness it was a slow day, because my friend had to stay on the line for at least 15 minutes to convince her to wait for a cop to come by and talk to her neighbors for her. Volunteer firefighter in Europe. Some summers ago we were called as first responders to a motorcycle accident. When we arrived the cyclist was obviously badly hurt after crashing in a car. But he was orientated and seemed okay. Ambulance and helicopter were on their way already, so we just had to stabilize him. Not a minute later he started deteriorating. Another minute later we started CPR. One of the arriving bystanders was a trauma surgeon and started helping immediately, shortly after the doctor on the helicopter arrived. It was obvious that there was massive internal bleeding. They first tried to relieve pressure by puncturing, and then pretty soon decided that the only chance was to open him up. So they managed a clamshell thoracotomy in the middle of the street, and one started to give the heart direct compressions. The bleeding was massive, and they discovered that there was aortic rupture. The blood loss was too extreme, and he died there. Still to this day I have to drive slowly when I pass by that stretch of road. Was an EMT before I became a nurse. Call came in for an MVC, motor vehicle collision, with two trapped. On arrival, cops said two young women, early 20s, drinking and going too fast, and flipped their car. Driver rejected. Then, we hear passenger screaming, "She's pregnant. Be careful, she's pregnant." Jaws hit the floor as the smell of alcohol on both them, and their car was overwhelming. We wanted to airlift the driver, but medic on scene said no. She had fractured literally almost every bone in her body. Open, compound fracture of tibia/fibula, 2 bones lower leg and fractured femurs. Normal protocol didn't work, because we can't pull traction on femur for the open fracture, and can't mast pants, because she has massive pelvic trauma/fractures with obvious internal bleeding signs and symptoms. Picking up her leg was like picking up jello. Had no substance to it. Was shattered beyond belief. We transported both of them together and not sure how we kept driver alive. She obviously lost the baby. Miscarriage started in back of ambulance. Rushed her in for emergency surgery. If I remember, she broke both legs, pelvis, arms, clavicles, ribs, facial breaks, skull fractures, brain bleeds, spleen ruptured, bowel damaged, lost uterus and ovaries, and I don't even remember what else. First bad accident seen as an EMT. Will never forget that feeling of holding a leg with no bone left to hold it together. 18-year-old took methadone and attacked his mother with a knife. She locked herself in the bathroom and called 999 UK here. We turn up and the son is butt-ass naked climbing out the window in the front door which he'd smashed. He gets taken to the ground and cuffed. Me and another manage to crawl through the window without cutting ourselves and find mother inside. Place is covered in blood smeared up the walls and every knife from the kitchen bloodied and discarded round the house. The adrenaline is just starting wear off as the paramedics arrive for mum, and as they are treating her, we go to the kitchen and find a dismembered member sat on the worktop. Turns out the kid had cut his own penis off after his mum locked herself in the bathroom. If you Google meow meow, slang name for methadone, one of the first results is an article about this call in Rolling Stone magazine, although they say he was hanging out the bedroom window and he wasn't. But yeah, I will never forget holding a penis that was not attached to somebody. Not having to utter the words whose penis is this? Does he have a penis? And wait, don't forget his penis. The ambulance almost left with him while we still had it in the house. Someone called stating they had seen a man on a small island on the lake hours ago, but now the man was gone and his boat is still out there. An older woman called in a half hour later stating her husband had gone missing. He was last seen taking his boat out on the lake sometime overnight. The increasing tension in her voice as she noticed sheriff's deputies were already dredging the lake was something else. She was calm, but clearly actively dealing with the fact her husband was likely dead. They found his body not long after I hung up with her. Sometimes it's the people screaming that get to you. Sometimes it's the quiet acceptance of a horrible truth that stays with you longer. I wasn't going to post, but the stories now make me want to. I work in maritime search and rescue. I was fairly new at my job and the area is quite large that we are in charge of. I had just showed up maybe a month prior, still learning the area. We get a call that 2 smaller private planes had collided mid-air. It was a horrible day. In total there were 19 people. We only found 12 people. 8 were deceased, and out of the rest who survived, to later to pass due to complications on the way to the hospitals. Anyone that survived was a miracle to say the least. This was almost a year ago, and we still get reports that parts of the plane are washing ashore. Man blew his face off with a shotgun. Wasn't dead yet. Scary shit. Also, a couple weeks ago I responded to a woman in labor. Get on scene. She had just delivered. She was naked and holding the baby with the cord still coming out of her vagina. She was high as hell and trying to shoot up one last time before she went with us, with her bloodstream still feeding the baby through the cord. Used to work crime scenes and got a call for a suicide. This was my first outdoor decomp scene. The man had been outside dead for a couple days in the middle of August, but the day he was found was a rainy one. Because of that, there were maggots everywhere. His face was pretty much gone. His skin was slipping and everything was just sopping wet. I went to take his fingerprint and it all just sloughed off into my glove. I'll never forget that feeling mixed with hearing the maggots and smelling the decay. 4 of my 5 senses were experiencing disgusting sensations. Glad I didn't taste anything that day. Memorial Day, 1989. FF/EMT at the time. Call dispatched as a car into a telephone pole. When we got there, I couldn't believe the carnage. A RHS student had been given a muscle car as a birthday present. The police later estimated he was going over 90 miles per hour when he hit the pole head on. Patient's right femur was about 6 inches long, his patella almost touching his pelvis. The entire long bone had compressed like an accordion. He had other multiple injuries. Took us 2 hours to cut him out of the car. The medics were pumping him so full of drugs. To maintain his blood pressure they started to openly worry that they might fuck his kidneys up. We finally got him out of the car, only time I've ever seen a kid used, on a gurney, and took off for the hospital. Medic had 2 large bore forths going, and had a BP cuff wrapped around one of the bags, to create his own rapid infuser. The kid lived. He ended up losing the foot on the leg that was destroyed, and that leg, from what I heard months later, was more metal than flesh. The irony was that the kid was a New York State indoor track and field state champion runner. I remember odd things people say under stress. A girl's arm was ripped to shreds in a dog mauling. She kept using the word meat. There's shredded meat everywhere. And she continued to say it as she found pieces of her arm on the ground. Is that a piece of my meat? And hoo. OMG, it's my meat. Some others. I brought you the asparagus. The asparagus guy who came back from the market to find his partner dead. Come on buddy. Don't do this. It's Valentine's Day. Homeless passerby who started CPR on a distraught woman's husband who collapsed at a gas pump. My dad's a firefighter, and for most of my younger childhood he didn't expose much of what he's seen/gone through in his career. As I've gotten older, he shared a bit more, and one day shared a perspective with me that opened my eyes to the full scope of what he does for the community. My brother and I were discussing my brother's military deployment and how some guys from his unit were struggling with PTSD, and my dad said that something that isn't talked about often is how many people walking the street who do what he does often have the same thing happening to them, but for an entire career/lifetime. I asked him what he meant, and he shared with me that it only took him about 3 years on the job before he couldn't truly celebrate any holiday anymore. Obviously this was met with some confusion on my end, but he said that every holiday/event in the yearly calendar is marred in his memory by some earth-shattering event he was called to for work. 4th of July for him as a child having drowned in a pool while parents were occupied with entertaining guests. Thanksgiving is car wreck in which the drunk driver walked away while their sober brother was in the passenger seat having their skull crushed by the frame of the vehicle he was driving. He has an entire calendar year of these, and that was the part that really stunned me. Gave me a whole new respect for the guy. My friend is a first responder. He once got a call about a man that had fallen in the shower. He gets there, and the guy is over 400 pounds and out cold on the bathroom floor. My friend, his partner and the guy's roommate try everything they can think of to get the guy on the stretcher, but the bathroom is tiny, and they can't even roll him over. Eventually they call 2 more ambulances and finally get the guy out of the bathroom. They get to the elevator and it's too small to fit the guy on the stretcher. So 6 paramedics have to carry the guy down 5 flights of stairs. My friend called in sick for the rest of the week cause he was so sore and stiff, he couldn't move. My father used to be a 911 dispatcher, was also an EMT for 5 years and a firefighter for over 30 years. Worst call he ever took was a woman who called that her house was on fire. She was trapped in the burning house and could not get out. First responders did not make it in time. He had to stay on the line with and listen to her as she burned to death. He also witnessed, while responding to a suicide call, one of his friends shoot himself in the face with a shotgun. He was still alive after the shotgun blast. They saved his life. He also responded to an ATV rollover of one of his friend's kids. ATV landed on the kid's face, shattered his skull. His jaw was not longer attached. My dad had to hold his face together while they transported the kid to the hospital. An over 45-minute drive. Kid survived. There are countless other calls that I could tell. My dad has witnessed a lot. Nicest man you will ever meet. Speaking for my mom, who was a 911 dispatcher for a long time who used to let me sit in and listen to calls way back in the day. A little old lady called the non-emergency number and said, "Yes, hello. My name is asterisk asterisk asterisk. How's your day going? Wonderful. Glad to hear it. Well, I just opened my freezer and I found a human head. What should I do?" I was maybe 8 at the time. My mom ripped my headset out of the computer and made me go to the break room. Turns out, little old lady had a grandson who had an argument with his friend, not sure over what, and he hacked his friend up with a machete, stuffed him in granny's freezer, and went on the run. I wasn't allowed to listen in on calls after that. Working as a deputy sheriff. Got a 911 call to the local park for a dead body by suicide. Got there and this lady with a flashlight waved us down. As we approached we yelled out asking if she was the caller. She said yes. We yelled out again, "Where is the body?" She said, "Right here," pulled out a gun and committed suicide right in front of us. She wanted to make sure we found her body before the kids showed up the next morning to play in the park. Got a call for a 3-month-old baby that was not responsive, arrived on scene, and was a second person through the door right behind the senior fire officer, SFO. SFO immediately began doing CPR, and was therefore unable to take on role of incident commander. I quickly reached up and grabbed the radio off his side and assumed command and control. This happened several years ago, and I can still clearly see the child's face. That was a hard day knowing that there was literally nothing we could do but trying our darnedest to do whatever we could. We never did find out the cause of death, but it was suspected that the infant passed away from SIDS while taking a nap. Not a 911 operator, but I used to work for a private company working with police that would contact us with subpoenas or emergency disclosure. There was a situation where a RedditJar driver had driven off allegedly on accident with an infant in the back seat when the parents exited the vehicle before the parents had the chance to open the back door and get the baby out of the back seat. I talked to both the cops and the parents. The guy said he would drop the baby off at the nearest police station instead of turning around to drop the baby off, which made everyone mad. Then he says, "Oh, I got another ride request, so I will drop it off at a different station that was even farther away." The cop said grab the cell phone from the mother. I was on the dad's line, so I could hear everything, and the cop bellowed out, "If you don't turn around right now I will fuck your whole life up," in the most enraged voice I had ever heard, and the guy turned around and returned the baby immediately. I'm a 911 operator. The hardest call I've ever gotten was a 7-year-old boy who drowned at the local lake/beach we had in town. He was in the state's custody and his sister had took him and his maybe 5-year-old brother out for the day to spend time together. The boy was in the water and all of a sudden the sister couldn't find him. A bystander called 911 while she ran into the water to find the boy. I ordered the caller to get all the children out of the water and to have all the adults get in, form a line, and start searching for the boy. I stayed on the line until the fire department got there, and they found the boy about 10 minutes later, so about 15 to 20 minutes after the initial call. They were able to get a pulse when in the ambulance and drove to the hospital. He was later pronounced dead that night and the hospital called us to let us know, which usually never happens. I was 19 years old, and I had a 7-year-old brother. I held it together, but as soon as I got into my car after my shift I cried so hard. All I could imagine was that it could have been my brother, and I never get emotional on my calls. I'm able to keep calm BC, it's not my emergency, but this one hit me right in the stomach. I'm lucky to have had such a good partner to help me through it, because I would struggle doing that alone. I will never ever forget that day. I remember everything that happened like it was yesterday, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm not a first responder, but in 2007 my 4 friends and I were driving home at 2 AM one night on the highway. No, we were not drinking that night, and up ahead in the distance I could faintly see something in the middle of the road. It was pitch dark, and I slowed down and kept saying WTF is that? Over and over again. Well, we slowed down and realized it was a black car with no headlights on, just sitting in the middle of the road demolished. I pulled over and me and all my friends sprinted to the car and checked it to see if anyone was inside. There was a woman in driver's seat who definitely didn't survive the initial crash. face just completely embedded into the windshield. I can still see this image till this day. And we were looking as fast as we could because we were in the middle of I-95 and thankfully no other cars had come by. We heard a child faintly crying and my friend looks in the back seat and sees there is a child in a car seat who didn't look injured. So we tried to open the door and it wouldn't fully open due to the damage to the car. So we all had to pull at this door to get it open, and let me tell ya, as easy as it sounds, that was no easy task for 4 18-year-old kids. But eventually we got it open just enough to get in there and pull the child out. We get to the side of the road and in the blink of an eye a semi comes full speed and pulverizes the car and drags it about 100 feet before coming to a complete stop. We called the state police and they came 15 minutes later and we waited with the child until they came and questioned us. We were called heroes by all the officers. Later investigations revealed that she came around the turn too fast and hit the guardrail and died on impact. On the way home nobody made a fucking sound.